One of my biggest clients congratulated my brother for taking over my company. I was still running it. And the worst part was, he didn't correct them. He thanked them, not awkwardly, not like there had been a misunderstanding, not like he was embarrassed that somebody had gotten the wrong idea. He thanked them like it was already true. That was the exact moment something in my head went quiet in a way I still remember. Not panic, not rage, not even shock exactly, just clarity. Because clients don't invent leadership transitions on their own. Somebody had told them. Somebody had already been out there quietly building a version of my future that did not include me. And somehow, I was the last person to know. The email came in on a Tuesday at 8:14 in the morning. Subject line: excited about the leadership transition. We were in the middle of a $280,000 packaging rollout for a national food brand, the kind of account that changes how the rest of the market sees you. I was expecting revisions, production questions, something about deadlines. Instead, I opened a message addressed to my younger brother, Evan. It said, "Evan, congratulations on stepping into a more visible leadership role. We're excited to work more closely with you as the company grows." I didn't even finish the first read before I scrolled down. He had already replied, "Appreciate it. Looking forward to what's next." That was it. No correction. No. Actually, Claire still runs the company. No, there's been some confusion. No hesitation of any kind. Just a smooth little answer that told me everything I needed to know. If it had been a mistake, he would have fixed it. If it had been confusion, he would have clarified. He didn't, which meant this had already been happening for a while. My name is Claire. I'm 36. And yes, technically, the company at the center of all this did start as my father's business. That's the version people like best when they first hear the story. Family company, legacy, continuity, a daughter helping her father's old business survive. That version is not exactly false. It's just missing the only parts that actually matter. By the time that business got to me, it was already collapsing. Not in a dramatic, movie-like way. Not because of one scandal or one terrible quarter. Just slowly, quietly. The way businesses die when the owner refuses to admit the market changed. My father started the company in the 90s. Back then, it was a small regional print and packaging business that survived the way a lot of small companies did, on old relationships, habit, and the fact that clients didn't have many better options. My mother helped with client communication. My father liked saying he built the business from nothing, and maybe at one point that had even felt true. Then the industry changed. Packaging stopped being just about printing and looking decent on a shelf. Branding got smarter, competition got faster, clients expected more, margins tightened, vendors changed, timelines got shorter. If you didn't modernize, you got left behind. My father didn't modernize. He got louder. When clients left, they were ungrateful. When projects slipped, employees were lazy. When cash got tight, the market was stupid. Everything was somebody else's fault. By the time I was 27, the business had dropped from around $900,000 a year in revenue to barely $320,000. The systems were old, the equipment was outdated. The books were messy in that not technically illegal but deeply embarrassing way. A few old clients still hung on out of habit, but even they spoke to us like they were doing us a favor. That's what I inherited. Not a thriving company. Not a gift. A cleanup job. I didn't join the family business. I rebuilt a failing one. I was working in corporate design back then and quietly miserable. Not the kind of miserable people notice. The functional kind. The kind where you wear nice clothes, meet deadlines, answer emails, go to meetings, and still feel your chest tighten every Sunday night because Monday means you have to step back into a life that already feels borrowed. I knew branding, I knew packaging, I knew exactly how badly my father's company needed to change if it had any chance of surviving. So when he started talking seriously about winding it down, I said I would take it over. Not preserve it, not honor it. Take it over and rebuild it. We did it properly. I hired an attorney. We restructured ownership cleanly. I took 90% and full operational control. My father kept 10% and a founder/advisor title. Enough to stay attached, enough to still say his name mattered, enough to keep one foot in the story, but not enough to run daily operations, appoint executives, or remove me on his own. At the time, nobody cared, because at the time, the business still looked like a burden. The first 2 years were brutal. I worked out of a half-empty office with a used MacBook and a folding desk that wobbled if I leaned on it too hard. I did everything myself. Design, sales, invoices, production scheduling, vendor calls, client management, late-night fixes, printer emergencies, proposal decks, revisions, payment follow-up, all of it. There were weeks I was working 80 hours and still felt like I was losing. I remember one Friday night in particular because it still makes my stomach tighten when I think about it. It was 11:40 p.m. I was sitting in my car outside the office, refreshing my bank app over and over because payroll was $18,200 and the account had $17,600 in it. I was $600 short, and I was trying to decide whether to move money from my personal account and hope one of 2 late invoices cleared on Monday before rent hit. That was the level I was operating on. Nobody called it a family business back then. Back then, my father told me I was emotionally attached to something that had already failed. My mother said I was exhausting myself for no reason. And Evan, my younger brother, said I was trying to rebrand a corpse. That's important because later those same people told a very different version of the story. Evan is 3 years younger than me. He's handsome in a polished, expensive way, and he has the kind of confidence people often mistake for competence. If you met him once, you'd probably think he was successful. He had that kind of face, that kind of voice, that kind of ease. Clean shoes, good watch, perfect smile. The kind of man who always seemed like he was either on his way to something important or just back from it. That was his real talent. Presentation. He always sounded like he knew exactly what he was doing. Until you asked for specifics. Then things went soft around the edges. He bounced between jobs for years. Real estate, software sales, a consulting role he could never clearly explain. At one point, he got very into crypto and told everybody at Thanksgiving that he was positioning for exponential upside, which is the kind of sentence that only sounds intelligent if nobody asks what it means. He lost most of that money. But in my family, failure was never really failure for Evan. It was bad timing, bad partners, short-sighted management, jealous bosses, the wrong environment. Because in their minds, Evan wasn't someone who failed. He was someone who just hadn't yet been given the right stage. Then the company started working, not all at once. Not in one huge breakthrough, but it started holding. A local skincare brand led to referrals. A regional snack company let us do a packaging overhaul that went well enough to bring in adjacent work. Then a beverage startup. Then a chain account. Then enough recurring revenue that I could hire real staff instead of patching together freelancers and hope. 3 years after taking over, revenue was around $1.4 million. We had repeat clients, a stable team, a functioning process, and a reputation people actually respected. We weren't surviving anymore. We were operating. And that's when everything changed. Suddenly it was the family company. My father started saying things like, well, the foundation was always mine. My mother started using the word legacy in conversations that had never required it before. And Evan started becoming the next step. It began softly, which is part of what made it so dangerous. Let him sit in on a few meetings. He just wants to see how things work. It might be good for him to have something real around him. I said no. Twice. Then one evening, my mother called me and said, in the gentlest voice possible, "You've built something real. Why are you so resistant to letting your brother be part of it?" That question stayed with me longer than it should have, not because it was right, because it made me feel selfish. That was one of my biggest weaknesses back then. I had been trained to confuse boundaries with cruelty. If I wanted something to be mine, really mine, some part of me still felt like I had to justify that choice, as if it were aggression. So I compromised. That was my mistake. At first, it did look harmless. Evan sat quietly in meetings, took notes, asked broad questions, complimented the team. He had just enough self-control in the beginning to seem respectful. Then he started speaking more, then suggesting things, then just helping frame conversations. Then one day, in a team meeting, he said, I think what we need to focus on in the next quarter is client visibility and margin discipline. We. I corrected him immediately. This isn't your company. He smiled like I was being overly intense and said, Relax, I'm just trying to help. That should have been the moment I shut it down. It wasn't. Because the next time he said we, it didn't hit quite as hard. And the time after that, I let it pass because we were under deadline and I didn't feel like making a scene in front of the team. And that is exactly how people get normalized into spaces they have no right to occupy. Not with one giant lie, with repetition. My mother started coming into the office too. At first she brought lunch, then she started staying longer. She learned names, asked employees how they were doing, complimented the office, hugged people, made it feel warm. That was one of the most dangerous things she did. She softened the room. She blurred the line between my company and our family's place. My father began stopping by as well. Not aggressively. Not in a way I could easily challenge without looking difficult. Just enough. He'd walk through the office, look around, ask for a few numbers, ask how a legacy client was doing, mention the old days, stand a little too long in the middle of a space that technically I owned and practically I had rebuilt. And slowly things shifted. Not on paper. In behavior. People started looking at Evan during meetings. Not everyone, but enough. He got copied on email chains he didn't need to be on. He started speaking after calls as if he were part of the decision-making layer. At first, people asked me before looping him in. Then they assumed. That should have terrified me sooner than it did. The first moment that really stuck with me happened on a Zoom call with a mid-sized consumer brand. We were discussing expansion into new retail channels. I was leading the call, everything was normal. Then Evan jumped in and said, As we move into the next leadership phase, I think our bigger focus is going to be shelf impact and internal speed. I froze. Not visibly. I didn't want to show it. But internally, something went tight. The client didn't question it. They nodded like it made sense. Like, of course, there was a next leadership phase. That moment sat in me for days. Then, a few weeks later, HR messaged me. Did you approve the leadership transition bonus structure? I stared at my phone and typed back, What transition? There was a pause. Then, he said you were discussing changes after Q4. He said, that was the moment it stopped being awkward and became dangerous. That night I stayed in the office after everyone left. I went through everything. Shared drives, calendar invites, internal documents, permissions, drafts, notes. And that's when I found it. A document titled Leadership Transition Plan. I opened it slowly. I was still in the structure, but not in charge. My future title was Founder/Creative Director, a role designed to sound meaningful while stripping out authority. Evan's title? Acting President. Not learning, not supporting, replacing. That alone would have been enough to start a war. Then came the email that removed any remaining doubt. My father accidentally copied me on a thread. Subject line, family alignment/messaging. That's where I saw the real strategy. This wasn't about ownership first. It was about perception. The messages talked about how to present Evan's role externally, how to make it feel natural, how to talk about the next generation, how to frame my likely resistance as emotional overattachment, how my father's founder status and minority stake gave enough legitimacy to socialize the idea first and formalize structure later. That was the phrase that made my hands go cold. Socialize the idea first. They weren't trying to win the legal fight first. They were trying to win the room. Clients, employees, family, vendors. Make it feel normal. Make it feel inevitable. Make me look unreasonable for resisting. Then let reality catch up later. And then came the last piece. An invoice. $42,600. Description. Strategic transition consulting submitted through a vendor account. Internally approved, not by me. That was it. Not suspicion, not interpretation, proof. By the time Thanksgiving came, I already knew what they were doing. I almost didn't go. Not because I was afraid of facts, because I knew exactly what the event had become. A stage. He was going to say it out loud. Everyone else was going to act like it made sense. And if I pushed back, I would be the problem. I sat in my car outside my parents' house for almost 10 minutes before going in. I remember staring at the front door and thinking, if I walk in there with this folder, whatever version of this family I've been trying to preserve is over. Inside, everything looked perfect. Candles, wine, silver, turkey. My mother's carefully staged table. Football in the other room. That fake holiday warmth that makes people believe decency is happening just because napkins match. And underneath it all, a setup. Halfway through the evening, Evan did it. Not dramatically. That would have almost been easier. He just started talking about the company, about growth, about what was next, and then casually said, I'll be stepping into more of a leadership role moving forward. Like it had already been decided. I let him finish. Then I said, do you want to explain this, or should I? The room went still. My mother said, Claire, not tonight. I looked at her and said, you chose tonight. Then I reached down, took the folder, and placed it on the table. Not slammed. Not theatrical. Just placed. Ownership documents, the email chain, the transition plan, the invoice. The room shifted. Not all at once, but enough. Evan tried to talk over me immediately. He said I was overwhelmed. He said I misunderstood. He said he was helping and that I always made things personal. Then my uncle picked up one of the pages and started reading. He got to the part about using my reaction, read it again, and that broke the room. My father finally said, this was about bringing the company back into the family. And there it was. Not support, not help, not structure, reclaiming. Evan looked at me and said, you didn't build this from nothing. And that was the moment everything became painfully simple. To them, I didn't own it. I held it until it was valuable enough to take back. So I said, on Monday, this stops. No argument, no pleading, no dramatic speech, just final. And I left. I got to my car and my hands were shaking so hard I couldn't turn the key for almost a minute. The weeks after that were ugly. Calls, messages, excuses, rewritten versions of reality. I ignored almost all of it. At work, I shut everything down. Access, permissions, informal channels, shadow authority, vague family presence. Anything that didn't exist on paper got removed in practice too. It wasn't clean. We lost one client. One employee quit because she didn't want to be stuck in the middle of what she called family politics with payroll. But the company held, and Evan kept trying. That was the part he never understood. The room had changed. He kept booking meetings, reaching out to clients, acting like the announcement had still somehow moved him forward. Then came the call that ended it. We were on with a regional brand that had been considering expanding its account with us. They had not worked closely with Evan before. He wanted to lead the conversation to prove he could. The client asked him a simple question. Can you walk us through your margin structure on the last project? Evan repeated the question back, which was his favorite trick when he needed time. Then he gave an answer. It was wrong, not slightly off, completely disconnected from the actual numbers. The client went quiet for a second, then looked at me and asked, what about your production timeline assumptions on the delayed packaging SKUs? Evan jumped in again and tried to answer. Wrong again. You could feel it happen in real time. The shift from new leader to this person has no idea what he's talking about. That was the end of the illusion. Because confidence without competence cannot survive specific questions. Within weeks, everything around him started to fade. Emails slowed down, replies got shorter, meetings didn't convert. One promising conversation with a local distributor quietly disappeared after he tried to position himself as a strategic operator and got asked for basic forecasting assumptions. Another contact stopped returning his calls after he overplayed his authority in a room full of people who actually knew how operating businesses worked. Not dramatically, quietly. The same way he had entered. That was the part I didn't expect to hurt as much as it did. Seeing how little there was underneath him once the family story stopped carrying his weight. He left a few months later. Different state, new role, opportunity. In my family, that's what failure looks like when nobody wants to say the word. My father never apologized. Not once. My mother called it a misunderstanding more than once, which told me everything I needed to know about how little either of them had learned. And I stopped explaining, because the truth was simple. They did not expect to take it from me. They expected me to do what I had done my whole life. Make things easier, absorb the insult, smooth the room, protect everyone else from consequences, and eventually convince myself that surrender was generosity. They expected me to give it to them, and for the first time in my life, I didn't.